This podcast is brought to you by TrophySmack.com.
Welcome, everyone, to the 2024 Artie Awards. 2024 was a year of growth and change for Arete Media. It's hard to believe that we started out with just, one podcast, but the podcast network started out with just 3 little startups that dared to say, why not? And now we have 14 active podcasts on the internet with recurring episodes and more on the way. It was with this in mind that last year I decided to create the Arete Media Podcast Awards, or the Artie Awards for short. The first year was somewhat thrown together, but this year we went all out with voting, an academy, and every consideration we can. And speaking of consideration, this podcast is brought to you by our friends at TrophySmack.com. And yes, all of the awards are provided by our friends at TrophySmack.com. We'll touch more on them a little bit as the show goes on, but for now, let's get to the awards. The first category is Funniest Podcast Episode of 2024. And the nominees are the Arete Podcast, number 15, Godzilla x Kong x Godzilla -1, featuring the Spur of the Moment podcast. The Final Frontier, Do Androids Dream of Killing Red Shirts? The Goosebumps Crew podcast, The Bumpy Side of YouTube. The Average Intelligence podcast, Average Intelligence Election Day Coverage. Part of Your Broadway World podcast, A Hocus Pocus Birthday Spectacular Celebration. Down the Middle podcast, number 75, Cutting the AEW Roster. Toon Talk 2.0, Characters on Trial, number 1. The Spur of the Moment podcast, R-rated comedies. And Leading the Band, episode 6, Under the Influence of Music. And the winner for the 2024 Funniest Podcast Episode Award is Toon Talk 2.0, Characters on Trial. That certainly was a funny one. Congratulations to everyone involved. And on to the next category. Best Thumbnail of 2024. And the nominees are the Arete Podcast number 16, Unveiled with author Debbie Lynn. The Final Frontier Podcast, I'm Captain Kirk. The Complete Guide to Happiness with Dr. Fantastic, Jim Gale. The Goosebumps Crew Podcast, Halloween is Our Night. The Average Intelligence Podcast is Am I Racist? Part of Your Broadway World podcast, Wicked Part 1, Stage, Page, and Screen. The Down the Middle podcast, Okada is All Elite. Toon Talk 2.0, Countdown to Deadpool and Wolverine. The Spur of the Moment podcast, a Deadpool season finale. The Method, Food and Cardio, Comida y Cardio. Leading the band, Meg Starr's Russian alter ego. The Startup Core Podcast, Episode 1 with Max Forsan of Dry Splash. The Road to Stardom with David Firestone, interview with actor Sean Harmon. And Classica Musica, guitarist and composer Hiroya Tsukamoto. And the winner is The Final Frontier Podcast. I'm Captain Kirk. If you're a Trekkie, you know how funny that is. And on to the next category. Best Guest of 2024. And the nominees are Rabbi David Grossbaum, the Arete Podcast. John Paul DeJoria, The Complete Guide to Happiness with Dr. Fantastic. Catherine Long, The Goosebumps Crew. Toast, Average Intelligence Podcast. Tegan Early, the Part of Your Broadway World Podcast. Papa D, Toon Talk 2.0. Ola Litkova, the Startup Core Podcast. Sean Harmon, The Road to Stardom with David Firestone. And Dragos Ilye, Classica Musica with Dr. Peter Zissa. And the winner is Catherine Long, The Goosebumps Crew. Congratulations to everyone. You guys got some amazing guests this year, exceeded expectations all around, so everybody deserves a hand. And the next category is Best New Podcast of 2024. And the nominees are Leading the Band, The Final Frontier Podcast, The Startup Core Podcast, The Complete Guide to Happiness with Dr. Fantastic, Classica Musica with Dr. Peter Zissa, Road to Stardom with David Firestone, and The Method. And the winner is The Final Frontier Podcast. It was truly stacked with new podcasts this year. The growth was bigger than anything I imagined. So I appreciate and love everyone that joined the network this year. And I look forward to reviewing that category again next year with all the new podcasts in 2025. But for now, we move on to the best podcast episode. But now a quick word from our friends at TrophySmack.com. Listen, everybody, there's always been a time where you feel like you deserve a trophy, or your friend deserves a trophy, or maybe your buddy loses your fantasy football pool. Regardless, there's always a reason why you need to buy a championship belt, a commemorative ring, a trophy, placard, or just wall art. Whether you want to make a goofy cross-promotion tool with your friends and fellow podcasters, or you create an awards show for your friends and fellow podcasters, TrophySmack.com can help you accomplish all these things and more. Probably their favorite product, as you can tell from, our little family here, is the custom championship belts. But the trophy placards, don't sleep on those either. And they rolled out their custom rings this past year in 2024. Those are really cool. And the best part is, I did a lot of shopping around when I was looking for a design for this and this. And these can get pretty pricey, especially for customization. Trophy Smack is not only very, very competitively priced, it's very high quality. These belts are every bit of legitimately 6 pounds. And what's cool is it's not just like some other sites where you can only put your center plate design in and then you're kind of stuck with everything. Trophy Smack has 4 custom belt designs, and you can change the strap color. You can choose between silver and gold. You can upload your own art or use their stock images along with all other means of customizations. And one thing you probably haven't seen yet are the side pieces that you can customize as well. So For this one, we went with the standard, globe. But for this belt, we customized it a bit more because of what this is. We went with the old podcast microphone and along with the play button, which seemed very apropos. And it'll be very exciting to see the podcast of the year belt that gets designed after we announce the winner tonight. So if you find yourself in the need for a custom belt, championship belt, loser belt, that's one of their best sellers, trophies, commemorations of any kind, whether they're legitimate or, just for fun, you can visit our friends at TrophySmack.com with the first link in the description, and you help the podcast network out when you do that. So check out our friends at TrophySmack.com for all of your trophy, belts, rings, wall art needs. And now, back to the show. And the next category is Best Podcast Episode of 2024. And the nominees are the Arete Podcast number 22, Judaism with Rabbi David Grossbaum. The Final Frontier Podcast, Space Strippers. The Complete Guide to Happiness with Dr. Fantastic. Who is Dr. Fantastic? The Goosebumps Crew Podcast, Dad's a Mad Scientist. The Average Intelligence Podcast, DBZ Narrator Passes and Dragon Ball Daima. The Part of Your Broadway World Podcast, Wicked Part 1, Stage, Page, and Screen. The Down the Middle Podcast, number 83, PWI Top 500. Toon Talk 2.0, Path to Cobra Kai Season 6. Classica Musica with Dr. Peter Zissa. Classical guitarist Dragos Iliad. The Method, the first podcast, El Premier Podcast. Road to Stardom with David Firestone. Interview with actress and singer Erin Gavin. The Spur of the Moment podcast, The Gnarly Stuff. Leading the Band, Episode 6, Under the Influence of Music. And the Startup Core podcast, Sebastian Mura of Alfana AI. And the winner is the Part of Your Broadway World podcast, Wicked Part 1, Stage, Page, and Screen. Congratulations to the Part of Your Broadway World podcast. And finally, last but certainly not least, the big one for the championship belt, Podcast of the Year 2024. In this category, every podcast is nominated, but we're going to list everyone in appreciation of the hard work they put in this year. The nominees are the Average Intelligence Podcast, the Down the Middle Podcast, the Arete Podcast, the Part of Your Broadway World Podcast, Toon Talk 2.0, the Spur of the Moment Podcast, the Goosebumps Crew Podcast, Leading the Band, the Final Frontier Podcast, the Startup Core Podcast, the Complete Guide to Happiness with Dr. Fantastic, Classica Musica with Dr. Peter Zissa, Road to Stardom with David Firestone, and The Method. And the winner for Podcast of the Year 2024 is the Goosebumps Crew Podcast. Congratulations, guys. You guys did a fantastic job, as did everyone else this year. We love you, we appreciate you, and we can't wait to see you back here for the 2025 Artie Awards. All the winners, you will get your digital awards shortly after the airing of this episode, probably a couple days to give you a chance to watch, and your physical awards will be brought to you as soon as humanly possible. But you are all the winners. Everyone here is a winner because you're making the podcast, you're doing your thing, you're working hard, as we all are. And we really appreciate everything you guys do, all the time, energy, and effort you put into this. Very appreciative. Like I said, we love you, every single one of you, and we're looking forward to a fantastic and great, awesome 2025. Thanks everyone for enjoying this episode of the Arete podcast. And congratulations to the winners, and great job to everyone. We'll see you next time. And thanks again to our friends and sponsors, TrophySmack.com.